everyone. This is State Senator Laura Ellman representing the 21st Senate District, covering parts of Downers Grove, Glen Ellen, Naperville, Lisle, Lombard, Wheaton, and Warrenville. I wanted to take time to tell you Happy Women's History Month. To mark the occasion, I'd like to talk about Patsy Mink. She's done a great job of representing women's fight for equality. Patsy is the first woman of color elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, and she has also authored much of the Title IX provisions that laid the foundations for academic parity. In connection to Illinois, Patsy attended the University of Chicago, and she studied science as an undergraduate. I encourage you to learn more about Patsy and other women in history who have fought for equality, social justice, and human rights.
When I think about a woman who has fought for equality and human rights, I think of a woman who comes from the district I represent, in Evanston, Catherine Woe McCulloch. Catherine was an attorney who used her legal practice to assist women with problems related to their lack of legal status, including wage discrimination, divorce, probate, child custody, and spousal abuse. Through representing women with these issues, she emerged as a leading figure among the advocates for women's rights in the state and a leading advocate of women's suffrage. She also wrote and lectured on women's issues, contributing to the women's suffrage movement in Illinois and nationwide. She drafted the legislation for Illinois women to get the vote in 1893 and carried it every year to the legislature for 20 years until its passage in 1913. As a woman in elected office, I am humbled and inspired at the work of women like McCulloch, who fought so that I and my fellow women colleagues are able to serve in elected office just like our male counterparts. Women bring a unique perspective to public office by using our experiences to better the lives of others. I am grateful that women suffragists fought for our rights, and I will continue the fight for gender equality so that future generations of women will have even greater opportunity.
One of the women I really look up to in history is Dr. Frances Kelsey, a Canadian-American pharmacologist and physician. She started her work in 1936 as a research assistant at the University of Chicago, where she only got the job because the male physician hiring didn't realize that Frances with an E was a female spelling of the name. In 1960, she was hired by the FDA, and one of her initial projects was to review the application for a drug called thalidomide. Despite intense pressure from the manufacturer, as well as political pressure, Dr. Kelly refused to approve the application, requesting further study, specifically data showing that the drug did not harm the fetus. Her hesitancy to approve the drug was vindicated when thousands of miscarriages and over 10,000 deformed infants were attributed to the effects of thalidomide, and it was determined that thalidomide did indeed cross the placenta. The Washington Post at the time hailed Dr. Kelsey as a heroine who saved thousands of women from miscarriages, prevented a similar tragedy of thousands of armless and legless babies being born in the United States. Dr. Kelsey what led to the passage of the Kefauver-Harris Amendment, strengthening prescription drug testing in the United States in 1962. By adding a requirement that drugs be tested for efficacy, that they report any adverse effects of the drugs, and that patients in clinical trials be informed and have consent to those trials. She was awarded the Distinguished Federal Civilian Service Award in 1962, only the second woman to receive the award.
This Women's History Month, we celebrate the powerful contributions women have made in history. One woman in particular I'd like to recognize is Nellie Quandra, who was an educator, a suffragist, and a pioneering member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, of which I am a member. Nellie was initiated into AKA in 1910, 2 years after the sorority was founded. She was instrumental in expanding the organization's reach and influence, establishing AKA's commitment to social justice and community service. Nellie led the effort to incorporate Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, which allowed the formation of additional chapters across the nation. As the first international president, she helped the sorority expand its support of African American women in colleges and communities throughout the country. Throughout her life, Nellie remained committed to the principles of social justice and equality. In 1913, she wrote a letter to the organizers of the National Women's Suffrage Procession, stating that women at Howard University would like to participate in the march and demanded assurance they would not face discrimination. As a result of her letter, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority women were able to march in the historic event in support of the women's rights movement. Nellie was a vocal advocate for women's rights and worked to promote education and empowerment of all women. Her legacy continues to inspire women and advocates for equality today, reminding us of the power ordinarily individuals have to create extraordinary change.
The woman in history that I admire most is Ida B. Wells. She was an American journalist, an investigative journalist, an educator, and a civil rights leader, and she fought for all civil rights and women's rights. And as an investigative reporter, she put her life at risk for so many people. She reported on the lynchings that were taking place in the South, and people wanted to quiet her, but she wouldn't allow that to happen. And she's also one of the founders of the NAACP organization that fights for the advancement of African American people. And so she's someone that I've looked up to for many years. So one of my favorite quotes from Ida B. Wells is, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them." And so that's so important, and that actually changed the course of the civil rights movement. And that's why Ida B. Wells is a woman in history that I admire.
A woman in history that I would like to highlight this Women's History Month is that of my soror, Mary Church Terrell. Through her own lived experience growing up in Memphis, she understood that colored women of all classes faced similar problems, including sexual and physical violence, inadequate access to health care, limited work opportunities, and no constitutional right to vote. As a result, she joined the women's suffrage movement in February of 1891 at the first National Council of Women Convention in Washington, D.C. In 1896, soror Mary Church Terrell became the first president of the National Association of Colored Women, the NACW, arguing that voting rights for Black women were inseparable from questions of Black men's disenfranchisement and the broader freedom struggle. Continuing her fight for injustice in 1909, she became one of the founding members of the NAACP alongside W.B. Du Bois that was founded after the violent 1908 race riots in Springfield, Illinois. In the midst of her educational and personal responsibilities, Terrell attended the National Women's Suffrage Association meetings and saw Susan B. Anthony speak on suffrage and its relation to colored women. Her connection to these two issues led her to discover Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the sorority which took part in women's suffrage activities early in its foundation, was founded on January 13, 1913 on the campus of Howard University, and the 51-year-old Terrell was considered an honorary member. In 1913, she and Howard University's Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated protested the segregation of the women's suffrage procession on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. The parade's organizer, Alice Paul, asked Negro women to march in the back after white Southern women objected to the inclusion of Negroes. When letters of outrage poured in from Black activists across the country, Paul conceded. Terrell and 25 members of Delta Sigma Theta marched with the New York delegation, albeit at the back. Because of Terrell's strong support for Black women's education, she later received an honorary degree from Howard University and became an honorary member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. From her tireless efforts to pass the 19th Amendment 100 years ago to serving as the first Black woman on the Washington, D.C. Board of Education, Terrell's work continues to echo throughout the world today. Her commitment to change opened countless doors of opportunity for those who came after her, including myself.
As a woman, I'm proud to be a state senator. I'm proud to have rights, and I'm proud to have a voice. But women didn't always have a voice, or a job, or rights. During Women's History Month, we remember and honor the strong will and determination of the women who stood up for us and fought for us. As a former teacher, I'm inspired by Malala, an education activist who began her fight for girls in Pakistan. She had a love for school, something she gained from her father at a young age. After girls were banned from attending school in Pakistan, she spoke out on behalf of all girls and their right to learn. Malala knew this put a target on her back, but she risked her life to be a voice for young girls. She was shot in the head and spent months recovering from her injury. This didn't stop her. She persevered. She was determined to continue the fight until every girl could go to school. It's women like Malala who never backed down in times of trouble that led to change. Let's remember Malala and all the women who paved the way for us today.
As we celebrate outstanding women in history during March, I want to highlight the work of Clara Barton. In 1854, Clara was hired as a recording clerk by the U.S. Patent Office in D.C. and was the first woman to be appointed to such a post. She quit when her salary was reduced lower than that of her male colleagues under the Buchanan administration. What Clara's famous for is during the Civil War, where she bravely and selflessly risked her life to give medical attention and supplies to injured soldiers on the battlefield. And I want to note, all while wearing a 19th century dress. Her work led her to receive the name Angel of the Battlefield, and in 1881, Clara founded the American Red Cross at the age of 59 and served as the president for the next 23 years, proving that there is not an age limit to be of service to others. As chair of the Senate's Health and Human Services Committee, I try to lead and serve by the example and words of Clara Barton. You must never think of anything except the need and how to meet it.
The woman I want to take the time to admire this Women's History Month is Pauli Murray. It's through her work as a civil rights activist, lawyer, gender equality advocate, Episcopal priest, a writer, and a poet that the intellectual foundations of two of the most important social justice movements of the 20th century were laid. Though she is a lesser-known figure, she left an indelible mark on history through her staunch advocacy for the rights of women and people of color and her tireless fight for civil rights. During her life, she faced discrimination for both her race and her gender, and it only kindled her passion for equality. At no time was she afraid to use her voice, whether it was on paper, where she called out the absurdity of segregation, or in speeches in which she chastised leaders in the civil rights movement for sidelining women. She was an intersectional feminist, 40 years before we had a word for the idea of intersectionality. Thanks to that term, she coined Jane Crow to demonstrate how Jim Crow laws negatively affected African American women. The trail that she has blazed influenced many of the women we openly admire today, including Eleanor Roosevelt and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It is Pauli Murray's tireless work for women's rights that I want to recognize and admire this Women's History Month. Women's history is an ever-growing tapestry, and the work and the mark that Patty Murray left should never be forgotten.
So when I have to respond to the woman I admire most, I can't help but think of three women that all together combined speak to the type of characteristics, the type of courage, the type of contributions that I hope to make. The first is Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She is a Supreme Court Justice from the Bronx. She's Puerto Rican. She has spent her whole career fighting for justice, and now she's in the highest courts. I adore that she comes from such humble beginnings. I had the opportunity to meet her during the summer, and she was just so down to earth, but so principled and stood by those principles. Second person is Shirley Chisholm, who ran for president. Back in the day, she was the first ever woman to run for president, African American. She is most famous for not only that courageous attempt, but she talks about that when you don't have a seat at the table, make sure you bring a folding chair, because you certainly deserve to be there. And then the last woman is a woman who contributed to the community that I have worked in for a long time and have a lot of ties to, and that is Irma Romero. And she would always introduce herself as an immigrant worker. And she's Mexican, but spent the majority of her professional life working in the Puerto Rican community in solidarity with the work we were doing to stabilize our community and to fight for self-determination. Those three women specifically inspire me each and every day.
For far too long, women didn't have rights. Women didn't have a voice. Women were treated as less than men. During Women's History Month, we remember, honor, and recognize the challenges and hardships women faced to get to where we are today. There were so many women who made history fighting for equality, social justice, and human rights. Shirley Chisholm is one that I certainly admire. She knew at an early age that racial and gender inequality was happening. She didn't sit back and watch. She joined local chapters like the League of Women Voters and the NAACP. After becoming the first Black woman to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives, she was known as Fighting Shirley for being a champion of racial and gender equality. Shirley wasn't just a woman who arrived in D.C. and fought for change. She was a Black woman who was outspoken and made herself a seat at the table, whether others liked it or not. While others were looking for change, she was fighting for change. She co-founded the National Women's Political Caucus and went on to become the first Black woman and second woman ever to serve on the powerful United States House Rules Committee. Of her legacy, Shirley Chisholm said, "I want to be remembered as a woman who dared to be a catalyst of change." Let's remember those who paved the way for women.
Every March, we celebrate the accomplishments and groundbreaking history that women have trailblazed for centuries. Millions of women make history every day, whether small or big. One woman that comes to mind is Jane Goodall. Dr. Goodall is a remarkable woman who, like me, cares deeply about the environment and wants to ensure our future generations will have a healthy planet. She established the Jane Goodall Institute in 1977, a global community-centered conservation organization, and the program Roots and Shoots in 1991, which encourages young people around the world to be agents of change by participating in projects that protect the environment. In 2022, she joined the board of Non-Human Rights Project, and in April of 2002, she was named the UN Messenger of Peace. Women like Dr. Goodall, who dedicate their lives to the betterment of healthier ecosystems, are at the forefront of the historical importance to me. Dr. Goodall transformed our understanding of what differentiates humans from the rest of the animal kingdom through the observations that chimpanzees make and use tools. She famously studied chimpanzees in Gombe National Park in Tanzania and has spent much of her life working to protect the endangered species. At 88 years old, she continues to travel the world to educate and advocate on the behalf of endangered species. Dr. Goodall is a global force for compassion. From living virtually alone in the forest, studying and observing chimpanzees during her days in Gombe, she is a committed activist who actively educates the public on the importance of conservation. Leaders like her would inspire me to continue my legislative work protecting our environment and communities to make Illinois a healthier and greener state.
Hi, I'm State Senator Selena Villanueva, and this Women's History Month, I want to highlight all the fighters for reproductive rights, especially Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, whose dissent opinion on the Dobbs decision captured the grief, the anger, and the frustration on such an important, impacting topic of our lives. Her work, her words, along with those with Justice Kagan and Breyer, really hallmark a moment in history But it's up to the rest of us to ensure that we now work together to fight to ensure that reproductive rights are the law of our nation. Happy Women's History Month.
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 Happy Women's History Month.